Hi, everybody, and thanks for joining us. Welcome to this special emergency edition of Post Hoc Live. I am Drew Armstrong, the executive editor of Endpoints News. Today's live stream is about Sarepta. If you were here and listening to us, you probably followed the news last week, but let's quickly recap things. So, since last month, the biotech Sarepta has been dealing with the fallout from the death of two patients who took its Duchenne muscular dystrophy therapy, gene therapy. And then on Wednesday, the company announced that it was cutting about 500 jobs, it was ending some pipeline programs, and it was adding a new warning label to the treatment. Then on Thursday, Endpoints and some other outlets reported that there had been a third death of a patient on another therapy in the company's pipeline. On Friday, if you can keep following along here, the FDA asked the company to pull the gene therapy from the market, and Sarepta refused. So we are going to talk about the details of what happened, what we think happens next with the company and the FDA, the stories we're working on, and the questions we still have. I suspect there are some current and former Sarepta employees who are going to be listening and watching on the live stream today. We want to talk to you, and we are going to give you information about how to reach out to us confidentially and in ways that let us protect you and let you protect yourself. Joining me today are two of our journalists who are leading the Sarepta story. We have Jared Whitlock and Lele Wu. Jared covers everything from rare diseases to diagnostics. He's an investigative journalist who's worked on a ton of different topics in healthcare. Lele Wu is one of our biotech reporters. She has covered Sarepta and gene therapy. She was actually on vacation in Japan, having a wonderful time and away from all of this, and then came back to the text and email inbox from hell and has been getting up quickly to speed on everything that happened. Now, let me do a quick little bit of housekeeping before we get started. If you're joining us for the first time, hello, welcome to Post Hoc Live. We bring you the reporting, the analysis, and the debate that usually happens behind the scenes in our newsroom, put it on screen live for you so you can listen. If you're joining us on YouTube, you're not already following us, please hit the little subscribe button down there below and you'll get alerts about future live streams. You can also sign up for the Post Hoc email on your Endpoints News subscription page. Now, if you are joining us on YouTube today, you can use the live chat to join the conversation. We'll be putting some information there as well about how to reach out to Lele and Jared on Signal, which is a confidential messaging app. And you can ask us other questions that you might have. Those will get fed to me over Slack and we'll get into things. If you miss us, our recordings will live on YouTube and on Spotify. So let's get into things. Jared, I want to turn to you. You were covering this story all last week. Just give us kind of the quick rundown of exactly what happened starting Wednesday when Sarepta made this big announcement.
Yeah. No, thanks so much for having me. So, as Drew mentioned, I closely report on rare disease research, including the challenges of bringing these drugs to market. I talk with companies, patient advocates, and a lot of stakeholders. And so, yeah, last week on Thursday, I had gotten some questions about why Sarepta hadn't disclosed that a patient died in a clinical trial testing one of its gene therapies for limb-girdle muscular dystrophy.
And Jared, just to back up, this was after Wednesday where they had announced like this big layoff and reorganization and pipeline changes, and they had done a big conference call with investors. It was this like big clear the decks corporate event. They took all the questions. They were like, "Hey, here's the bad news. We're making all these changes. Great." The stock went up. Everybody thought we were done with news, right? And then fast forward to Thursday. Sorry to interrupt you, but I want to make sure our audience knows kind of catching up to this moment. So Thursday, stock is up. We know everything. And then
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's why people started reaching out to me, saying, "Well, yeah, why wasn't this disclosed on Wednesday during this corporate update?" So that prompted me to go into reporting mode and figure out what's happening here. We published a story on Thursday evening about this death, and so naturally, after we published our story and after other outlets had published stories as well, there were just so many questions swirling out there about, yeah, why this wasn't disclosed. That's when Sarepta had a corporate update on Friday, or excuse me, an analyst call where a lot of analysts had asked these questions directly. They wanted to know, yeah, why this wasn't disclosed. Are there other things that we don't know about, other deaths that we don't know about? And Sarepta, for its part, had said that, well, this event was part of a study, and typically we would disclose an event like this in a study once that study is complete. And had also said that this, because it's a study that's different from the earlier deaths that occurred in the Duchenne population. But you could also sense that analysts were not necessarily satisfied with that answer and just continued to give the company a lot of questions. So that happened Friday morning, and then from there, things just the story. For people who thought the story that was the end of it that day, we're very wrong because there's just so much that happened after that. There started to be media reports coming out about how the FDA was going to request that Sarepta pull its Duchenne therapy from the market. And then later that day, we got a press release from the FDA where they said, yes, that's what we're looking to do. And then this dueling statement came out from Sarepta about how it's actually not going to comply with that request. They felt like there wasn't any new safety signals here to talk about, and nothing had necessarily changed about the situation. So that, of course, brings up a lot of questions about what's going to happen
Yeah.
going forward. It looks like there's going to be a showdown between the company and the FDA, and how that unfolds and what tactics each side is likely to take. I think is something we're going to be closely watching going forward.
Super, super interested in this story, and it has been, yeah, like a very dramatic and busy couple of days already. But Lele, I want to bring you in here because you've been following this company for a long time, and like this all dates back to, I believe, is it June where we learned about these two original deaths, or I would say latest deaths, in the patient population. Can you kind of bring us back to like what started this, before the last week's kind of insane just news events?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like June is always
Feels like a
somehow an
year ago. Yeah.
extremely eventful month for Sarepta. Their initial approval in like the youngest kids, and then their expanded approval. And now we learned, this feels like forever ago, to me at least, that like the first patient, a teenager, died from getting the Duchenne muscular dystrophy gene therapy, Elevidys. And that was the first death that Sarepta said was related to Elevidys. And so what had happened is this patient died from acute liver failure, which is sort of a known side effect related to these AAV gene therapies that use this AAV viral vector. Um, and then so we reported that. And then not long after, there was a second death of a second teenager who also had liver failure related to Elevidys. And so Sarepta said that they were going to stop shipping the therapy to non-ambulatory patients, who are generally the older patients with more severe disease who can no longer walk on their own, need a wheelchair. And so, I mean, me coming back from vacation now, I learned with, I guess, the rest of our audience that the FDA is asking them to not only stop like with the non-ambulatory, but also the ambulatory, which is a little bit of a different situation, because in the ambulatory patients, so younger patients who are able to walk, Sarepta has full approval of Elevidys. So it makes it a little bit more complicated, and interesting to see how the FDA will be pulling, or will be trying to pull, Elevidys from the market there.
Yeah, and we're gonna get into, I think you guys have brought up maybe 10 different things that I think we need to spend some time talking about. I do want to quickly at the top, and we will recap this For our audience, I mentioned that I suspect there are some people from Sarepta watching, whether they're current employees or people who've been affected by the significant job cuts that were announced last week. A big part of what we do as we think about where this story goes next, there's a handful of things that I know we're very, very interested. We're interested in the patient community and the safety of this drug, and if we know everything that there is to know. We're very interested in what is happening inside Sarepta right now. I think we've seen, with the kind of lack of disclosure about some of these events by management, we're very interested in how that unfolded and some of the decision making there. We're interested in what the investor reaction may be. I think when we see situations like this, there can be a lot of pressure from investors on boards and on management to make changes. Sometimes we see people coming in from outside, activist investors. So if you an employee at Sarepta, if you're a former employee of Sarepta, if you're someone in the patient community, we want to hear from you. We are actively trying to learn more about this situation. We think that there's a ton more to report from that. And so I want to give Jared and Lele a chance to talk a little bit about how this works when we talk to you. We understand that, for some people, it may be their first time talking to a journalist. And I really view that there are kind of three very important duties that we have as journalists in doing this. First of all, is that we need to get things right and be accurate. And we really depend on people who are in possession of important information. Sometimes that information is confidential to talk to us. We will talk to you what's referred to as background or off the record often to start. That means that we don't use your name, or we might just be talking on a basis that we're not going to publish the information yet. We might discuss how we might be able to use that. Records, emails, chats, photos of documents are always very helpful. One of our second duties is making sure you are protected. We use the Signal messaging app a lot. If you don't know what it is an app you can download on your mobile device. It has end-to-end encryption. It's very good for protecting sources. You can set messages to disappear. I am going to share Jared and Lele's Signal handles out loud here on the live stream. We're also going to be putting them in the chat on YouTube. So if you're watching there, Jared's Signal handle is Jared Whitlock. That's Jared, Jared Whitlock, period 73. Lele's is lelewu.24. So that's LEIWU period 24. You can reach out to either of them through that channel, and we will have those conversations with you. We will do everything we can to work closely with you and explain how it works. Jared, I want our audience to hear from you because you have dealt with a lot of confidential sources before. Can you just spend just a quick moment talking about like how, when you get a source reach out on a story like this, how you work with those sources, what they can expect from you just in, 30 seconds or 45 seconds. Like just, to the folks who've never done this before, your civilians, like what is this like for them from your end?
Yeah, no, thanks. And I think that you definitely touched on something that I was going to say that first off, we'll protect your confidentiality. We're not going to be putting you on blast or anything like that. And I think when I get a request like this, I mean, I take it very seriously that want to accidentally disclose someone's information. I've never burned a source like that. And when I get one of these tips, we'll start by just setting the terms of the conversation and saying, okay, is this off the record? Which means nothing that we talk about can be used in any kind of reporting. There's also the term on background, meaning that sometimes if we get enough background and there's enough credibility to what these people are saying, then we will publish a story with on background sources. And yeah, I mean, I think that this, starting off the record can be really useful just to allow people to speak freely. And often that information can point us in various directions that we might want to look. It's just the starting point for a place of reporting. But yeah, as Drew said, I've built a lot of stories off of sources that started off on background or off the record. And yeah, we'll sorry to keep bringing this up, but we'll protect your confidentiality.
Yeah. Lele, if people are going to reach out to you, I mean, what are the things that you're most interested in learning about more with Sarepta right now?
I mean, I feel like something that we've seen like on the internet maybe is that there are a lot of people who like went through the layoffs and were like not happy with how it went down. Obviously, none of this can be substantiated, but like I spent part of my morning just like scrolling through Reddit and sort of like trying to figure out what happened last week. And so I mean, I think something that was like how this all went down, and like not even like just this past week, but I think at least for me, like covering Sarepta the past 2-3 years, like this is a company that has had like a very roller coaster history of like their like even before this gene therapy of like their interactions with the FDA and like marketing these Duchenne products. So I'm just kind of curious about like what the inside perspective of like all of this up and down has been like. And I don't know, I think part of our role as like journalists is sort of, even if it doesn't like if it's just an off the record conversation, to like provide an outlet for people to sort of talk about these things because maybe they don't get a chance otherwise to talk to someone about like how things happened and what happened to them specifically.
Yeah, and just following up really quick on something Lele said, I'd really like to give an inside look at what happened the last week or so at Sarepta, and just giving a rundown of how this all went down. There are so many questions. For instance, as we talked about earlier, the FDA, with their request to pull this Duchenne treatment, they made that on Friday. Did they make that specifically because of these media reports about the death in the limb-girdle study, or
Yeah.
what exactly prompted that
I,
specifically?
I think that's something I think we've heard some questions about is whether FDA's action here is related, quite specifically to the Duchenne therapy, or if they're curious about something broader going on here. And I think that, understanding the scientific rationale of this is going to be really important going forward. Just as we were getting started, by the way, with the podcast, I should mention, or sorry, with the live stream, we actually had some breaking news come across. We're going to have a story out in this in a few minutes. But for those who are want to keep up with this live, we actually just got a statement from the FDA. I mentioned that Sarepta had refused to, pull their drug, and usually the way this works is, when there's a full approval, the FDA might say, "Hey, we are asking you to pull the drug," and typically the company complies. I think very rarely do we see what appears to be kind of a showdown setting up, but the FDA just sent us a statement saying that they are deeply disappointed that Sarepta refused to work with FDA to and safety of patients. We are deeply troubled that the company insists on dosing additional patients with Elevidys while we investigate this concerning safety signal. FDA will remain flexible, but will move swiftly when a product presents an unreasonable and significant risk, and will leverage our full regulatory authority to pursue a course of action that protects patients. So obviously, some more news there. Jared, can you talk about, I mean, you deal a lot with the rare disease community, and Layla, you should weigh in here as well. But this is a drug that I think is so surrounded by controversy. I mean, the approval of it was controversial. Obviously, the safety stuff that is being brought up now is going to create more controversy. The showdown with the FDA, but I mean, a lot of the patients and families in these rare disease communities, I mean, they have long held a kind of very different attitude probably around risk, in particularly when it relates to fatal conditions like this one. Can you talk a little bit about how you talk to the rare community? I think maybe there are specifics to Sarepta and this therapy as well, but I mean, how has the rare community kind of approached risk and thinking about these treatments, when you speak to families, Jared, what's kind of is there a broad kind of sentiment about how people feel about that stuff that might be very different from what FDA is doing here?
Yeah, maybe I could talk about the broader backdrop here, and Lele could
Yeah.
talk more about Sarepta, I think. But maybe just broadly, I think that the rare disease community has pushed for more regulatory flexibility for quite a while now, and the gold standard at FDA is blind, placebo-controlled study. And for various reasons, the rare disease community feels like the FDA's thinking can be outdated. So you've seen just this really, really big push from rare disease advocates to try to modernize the FDA to be more flexible. And I think that has really started to filter down. And I think Sarepta is probably a great example of that. I mean, I talked with Peter Marks last year about how he's thinking about this issue, and he's no longer obviously with the FDA, but I think that he's really ushered in kind of this larger change. And I think that, yeah, going forward, with all of this that's happening, this showdown that we're talking about, I'm really curious about how this is going to impact how patients are thinking about this Duchenne therapy. There might be this rush to get the drug because people fear that it could be pulled from the market, or it might prompt more scrutiny, even among patient groups, and make them think that, they got to go about this a different way in the future. But yeah, Lele, I think that, yeah, you should talk more about Sarepta since you've been more closely reporting on them.
I mean, I think from like the very beginning of Sarepta's story, um, with this gene therapy, like patient groups have been very, very forward about like they want to take this risk. And like Duchenne muscular dystrophy is a terrible, terrible disease. Like boys who have this disease, like they start losing their muscle function at a very young age, and many of them don't survive past like young adulthood, their 30s. Um, and so you can understand like the desperation that a lot of these families bring when they're advocating for these therapies to be approved. I mean, starting from like 2023, when the FDA held an advisory committee where they bring in outside experts, and also patient advocates and families get a chance to chime in. You can really feel that like these patients were like, please let us be the ones who are choosing to take this risk. Um, and I think that has sort of been effective throughout, that a lot of these patient advocacy groups have been bringing of like, it's like an individual family choice that they want to take this risk. And Jared, maybe you can talk more to this, but I don't think that's specific to Duchenne muscular dystrophy, for families to have that perspective.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think that the thought has been that um, some hope is better than no hope. But that said, even with this Sarepta example, you do see some parents who are saying that, well, this drug doesn't work, and we should have applied more scrutiny to it. So I'm curious to see if more of that viewpoint is going to
Yeah,
emerge going forward.
I think a huge point of contention has been that Sarepta won accelerated approval on very, very little data in older patients. And so people want to like have that data and see like what the actual effect is in a clinical trial. Um, and I will say, like, I think another perspective is that like when like I think initially when these clinical trial results came out, people were like, oh, like maybe Sarepta's gene therapy is safer than other gene therapies because there were no deaths reported, where people know that there is like a pretty serious risk calculation with gene therapies. And there's been a history starting from like 1999, I think, with the initial gene therapy studies with these like AAV related deaths. And so there was that initial like, oh, like let us try because it like seems to be very safe. And now we're kind of seeing like the other end of that.
And there, I mean, Lele and Jared, these are not uncomplicated relationships between, the patient groups and the companies as well. I mean, I think like one thing that I have learned from you all's reporting over the years and listening to, FDA advisory committees and things like that is that there can be some very, very close advocacy-based relationships between, companies that are working closely with patient groups and families to help put pressure on regulators to advance some of the things. And sometimes that can be quite appropriate. And I mean, we've seen lots of successful patient advocacy, in pushing drugs forward. I mean, dating, back to the HIV crisis and things like that. But these are not, I think it's going to be very interesting to see if there is a breach of trust here that somehow changes those relationships somehow. And I know we've seen some pushback from some families as well on this particular therapy, right, Lele?
Yeah, I mean, I think Jared can maybe speak to this, at least like in the past week. But I think there are some questions, at least, on like how Sarepta has been handling all of this. And not just from families, but also I think we saw like last week from analysts about like how they're choosing to disclose information. And I think that'll be an interesting point moving forward too, is like how this company can like rebuild maybe, or like build back their credibility that they lost last week.
Well, and Jared, I know you were on one of the analyst calls where I think people were, and for those of you who are not, I used to be a business journalist and I still am, but I used to be a markets journalist. And so, when companies have big news, they hold these calls with investors and stock market analysts, and it's a chance for the analyst to ask lots of questions. Management has to get up and answer them. And Jared, I mean, last week, I think the analyst community, which, sometimes has a reputation for maybe being a little bit softball on these calls, was, I think, there was an edge to the call last week, was there not?
Yeah, I think so. You had analysts, I think at least three, maybe even more, specifically ask the question, okay, are there any more deaths that we should be aware of? And the fact that you had to have three people, three different analysts, ask that question three separate times, I think, spoke to maybe how there had been some trust issues, because this death wasn't disclosed. And yeah, there was just you did have one analyst come out and say as well that hey, this was a material event. In other words, they weren't necessarily asking a question; they were making a statement and saying this was a material event. You should have reported this. And that's just something that I feel like you don't see in a lot of analyst calls, where someone's making an argument,
And
as
and
opposed to
their
a question.
argument, right, was that, hey, we would have disclosed this when we reported the results of the trial. But Lele, I mean, you've covered a whole lot of clinical trials, and how common is it that if a patient dies on therapy, that doesn't get reported or disclosed until much later on?
I mean, I think it really depends on the therapy, because like sometimes that does happen, especially in like cancer trials. Like you don't learn about the deaths until people report it at a medical conference. But I think for Sarepta, this case is very different. Like they're undergoing a radical like downsizing of their company. Um, like they're changing up their pipeline. They're facing probably more scrutiny than ever before about the safety of their gene therapy products. And this event was, related to the safety of an experimental gene therapy product. And I think another point of sort of questioning for Sarepta. I can't speak to last week's analyst calls because I wasn't here for them, but I know from like before writing about the patient deaths, like another point of questioning was like, what about other hospitalizations related to liver side effects with these gene therapies? And I don't think Sarepta has given a straight answer on these analyst calls to that question.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's, I think so often, companies kind of do get the benefit of the doubt in these situations. And I have to imagine there's going to be a substantial kind of look back at a lot of the use of these drugs over the last few years to see if there's things that people missed.
Yeah, I was going to say, just on that note, on the analyst call, there were a lot of questions around, okay, so there are these two deaths from the Duchenne treatment, one death in this limb girdle study. How related are those things, or are they not related? And you had the company saying that this is a different this was a different construct, different manufacturing process, etc. But the same vector gene therapies, and the FDA had revoked Sarepta's platform designation on Friday. So I think that's another thing that I'm interested in as well, is just how much overlap there is between these programs.
Well, I know you guys are incredibly busy with this story, and you've been generous with hanging out here on the live stream already. And I know you have calls to make and people to reach out to. That is, unfortunately, though, all the time we have today. So thank you, Lele and Jared, for joining us. As a reminder, you can reach out to either one of them on Signal. In the chat on YouTube. I will repeat them here. It's jaredwhitlock.73 and lelewu.24. We will protect your confidentiality and make sure that we verify anything that you do share with us. Thank you for listening to Post Hoc Live. You can always follow along for more news at endpoints.news or by subscribing to our newsletters. The recording of this conversation is on YouTube, and the audio will be up on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts shortly. If you are already signed up for our Post Hoc newsletter, you'll get notifications the next time we have a broadcast coming up. If you're not signed up, head over to endpoints.news, and then in the top right-hand corner, hit the reader profile link, then preferences, and click to activate Post Hoc. You can also follow us on X, LinkedIn, YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts, and Blue Sky by searching Endpoints News. A huge thank you to our producer, Nicole Wetzman, and our engineer, Dalen Turk. For Post Hoc Live, I am Drew Armstrong, Executive Editor of Endpoints News. We will see you the next time news breaks.